Psycho former friend from high school. Planned to kill me because she was insane about a boy. This is a story I have wanted to tell for a long time. This took place between 1995 and 2002. Everyone has had a bad friend or two. I had an epically bad friend. If it hadn't happened to me, I would never have known that this strange mental disorder was real, or that people could behave this way outside of Lifetime Channel movies. I grew up in northern Indiana, and I went to a large high school in the mid-90s. And during my senior year, I met another student named Hannah, who had recently transferred from the main local Catholic high school in the area. It was unusual for someone to transfer that late from a private to a public school. Hannah said she had been expelled because of a fight with another student over some drama involving a boy. She said the other girl had made allegations against her, accusing her of attacking her. Whatever had happened, the police had been contacted, and the other girl had taken out a restraining order against her. It led to Hannah's expulsion, and that was how I came to meet her. Hannah insisted none of it was true. She said she never tried to hurt her. Later, I went to college in Indiana, and she went to college in Florida. One day, a friend of mine from the dorms ran into a guy she had known from Catholic school back in my hometown. After he left, she told me about an incident that had happened to him. Two girls had been fighting over him, arguing about which one was his girlfriend. The strange part was that neither of them had actually been dating him, yet both were convinced they were secretly in a relationship with him. The whole thing had been very strange. Then she mentioned that one of the girls' name was Hannah. The next summer I was back in my hometown and Hannah was also. I hung out with her casually. I told her what I had heard about her. She said she would tell me what really happened. She had a crush on this boy, but when she saw him talking to another student named Julie, she became jealous. She said she was convinced that this boy, Mike, wanted to be her boyfriend and that Julie must have said something bad about her. Hannah said Julie was popular, pretty, and a cheerleader, and she hated everything about her. So she decided she would see if she could push Julie to commit suicide. Hannah said it hadn't worked, but that Julie had a nervous breakdown. I asked her what she had done. We went back to Hannah's house, and up in her bedroom, she pulled something out from the back of her closet. It was a set of books. One was about using dirty tricks to get revenge on people, and the other had a cartoon character on the cover pulling their hair out, with the title in big letters, Gaslighting. I know it's a common phrase now, but back in 1995 I had never heard of it. I asked Hannah what the book was about. She said it was about how to drive someone crazy. She said it was simple. You just make them believe things aren't true, or that things they remember never happened. Then she told me what she had really done to Julie a couple of years earlier in high school. She had pretended to be friends with Julie. She got her phone number and started making anonymous phone calls to her. This was long before cell phones were common. Hannah said she had a friend from her church who had a crush on her, and she would trade sexual favors with him in exchange for pretending to be Mike on the phone. He would get a blowjob for every time he did this for her. Fake Mike would tell Julie not to talk to him at school so they could keep their relationship secret. Hannah would put notes in Julie's locker and sign Mike's name on them. Fake Mike would make plans to meet Julie at the mall or the movies, and then never show up. It sounds incredibly stupid now, but they were only about 14 or 15 when it all happened. Hannah said she had done something really embarrassing, but that it had worked. She had a mixtape and she would whisper nasty little phrases like, "You want to die," or "You should kill yourself" between songs, and had played it in her bedroom when Julie was over. Obviously she commented on it, and Hannah sat there with a straight face and said she didn't hear anything and had no idea what she was talking about. She had set it up with her brother earlier, and had asked him to help her play a prank on her friend. He came into her bedroom and said he couldn't hear anything, and turned around and told Julie that she must be crazy and hearing things. Julie's parents decided to confront the boy and his family about his behavior toward their daughter. He had no idea what was going on, because her parents had confronted him about something he had never done. Julie was publicly humiliated at her high school, and everyone was talking about how she was crazy. Hannah loved every bit of it, until Julie's parents got their phone bill and decided to take a closer look. Mike hadn't been calling their house, but somebody had. There had been numerous anonymous phone calls. When Julie's parents checked the records, they discovered that all the calls had come from Hannah's home phone number. Julie confronted Hannah about it at school, and that was when something violent happened between them in the stairwell. Hannah said Julie started screaming at her, insisting that Mike was her secret boyfriend. Hannah was furious about it. She said Julie made that part up to get back at her and embarrass her for what she had done. According to Hannah, Julie had exaggerated what happened in the stairwell and that it had all been an accident. She insisted she never tried to push her over the railing. She had merely bumped into her. Hannah wasn't embarrassed about it. She was proud of it. The only thing that upset her was that she had been caught. She said that most of the people at her Catholic school still thought Julie was crazy, so she considered it something of a victory. Hannah didn't have anything to say in her defense, just that when she liked a boy, she would do anything to be with them. That summer, Hannah started dating a guy named Derek. Every time I saw her, she told me stories about their wild, crazy sex life and how much he was in love with her. She said it was a secret affair, that they were sneaking around behind his girlfriend's back. We saw him once at a party, and he screamed at Hannah to stay away from him and to leave him and his girlfriend alone. Someone had been making strange, anonymous phone calls to them, and when he paid to have the number traced, it led back to Hannah. Hannah admitted she had been trying to break them up because he was taking too long to do it himself, but she said she'd overplayed it, and now he was furious and had broken things off with her. She was depressed after Derek, so I took her out to a bar. Hannah started flirting with this much older guy in his 40s who was sitting by himself. She had recently purchased a cell phone. This would have been in '96 or '97 when they were still kind of new and novel. The next thing I knew, she has this phone out and I thought she was giving this old guy her phone number. Instead, he asked her what she wanted him to say. She typed a phone number in, handed the guy her phone, and he made disgusting comments to whoever answered about how he was having sex with this guy's girlfriend and commenting on what a whore she was. He hung up and started laughing and handed the phone back to Hannah. Hannah gave him a $20 bill and said the girl was a bitch and deserved it for stealing her boyfriend. She was paying complete strangers to anonymously call people she hated on her cell phone and recite some prearranged script to spread rumors about them. I ran into a mutual friend later in the summer and mentioned that Derek had broken things off with Hannah. She gave me a very funny look and said that maybe there had never been any relationship to break off. A year later, we were both temporarily living back with our parents and feeling a bit adrift. Hannah had been kicked out of her dorm after another student made an accusation against her, and she never ended up completing her degree. She had started hanging out with some of her old friends from high school again. One of them was a young woman named Kelly, who Hannah had once been pretty close with. But something had happened between them, because Hannah wouldn't stop talking about how much she hated her. It had something to do with Kelly's new boyfriend, Dan. Hannah insisted that Kelly was using him in some bizarre scheme to make another guy jealous, and she claimed she was worried Dan would get hurt because, according to her, Kelly had an STD that she was hiding from him. I drove by her house one night and saw 2 police cars parked out front. When I got home, I called her, but she said she couldn't talk. The next day, I went over to see her, thinking maybe their house had been robbed or something, but no. The police had been there to talk to her about an incident that had been reported. Hannah was upset. She said that she had to tell the police that she had smoked weed and had gotten high because Kelly had made an accusation against her. Hannah said it was an accident and a misunderstanding. Hannah swore she hadn't been trying to hurt her. The day after Hannah told me how much she hated Kelly, she apparently called her up and said she wanted to talk about something. She and another friend showed up, and the 3 of them went to a local overlook to smoke a joint. The other girl waited down below while Hannah and Kelly went off to talk privately. Kelly said that while they were talking, Hannah asked her to look at something, and when she turned her back, Hannah suddenly grabbed her and tried to push her off the ledge. They were about 100 feet up, and a fall from that height would almost certainly have killed her. Kelly said they struggled back and forth until she managed to regain her balance, then ran off screaming about what Hannah had tried to do. Hannah said it was all a misunderstanding and an accident. She claimed she had just been trying to show Kelly something, but because she was high from the marijuana, she lost her balance and grabbed Kelly to steady herself, not to push her off the edge. According to Hannah, Kelly nearly fell because she overreacted hysterically. Kelly, however, was adamant that Hannah had done it on purpose, that she'd tried to kill her out of jealousy over her relationship with Dan. She said it was obvious to everyone that Hannah was obsessed with him. What Kelly hadn't mentioned to the police, though, was that they had all smoked a joint right before the incident. When Hannah told them that part, the police said there wasn't enough evidence for a case. They were, however, unhappy that Kelly had left that detail out of her account. That was it for Hannah and most of her high school friends, or at least for a couple of years. Kelly stuck to her version of what happened, and her friends sided with her. People began talking about the strange rumors that had followed Hannah around since high school. I thought it was suspicious, but I couldn't bring myself to believe that she tried to kill another woman. I thought that sort of thing only happened in the movies, not small towns in Indiana. I did not, however, want to be friends with her. She was an embarrassment to be around. She had almost no friends left in town at that point. One day she called me and said she needed a change, that she was going to start a new career and move to Minneapolis to make it happen. She moved in 1998, and I honestly thought I'd never see her again. I wish I hadn't. She called me about a year and a half later. She said she was doing really well and that the move had been good for her. She told me she'd made new friends and met a guy she was completely in love with, the one she was sure she was going to marry. His name was Dan, and she said he was the one who'd gotten her into punk rock and heroin. I kind of paused when she said that. I wasn't any kind of angel in my 20s, but I never even dabbled in hard stuff like that. It didn't sound good at all. Hannah insisted it wasn't a habit. She said it was amazing, that it made her feel free and that it was easy to control as long as you were careful. It was a complete shift in lifestyle and scene for her. Before, she'd been more of a hippie chick, laid back and earthy. But that was all gone now. At that point, her life revolved around 4 things: her hair, punk rock, heroin, and Dan. She wanted to come back for a visit, so we met up and went to the mall. While we were there, she stopped at a kiosk and said she wanted to buy a cell phone. The thing was, she lived 8 hours away in a completely different state with a different area code. We got into a small argument about it. Back in 2000, cell phones were billed through your local area code, and roaming charges were ridiculously expensive. But Hannah brushed me off, saying she'd done her research and everything would be fine. She bought the phone and listed her boyfriend Dan as the main user on the registration. After she left, I noticed she had forgotten her curling iron, so I thought I'd surprise her by calling her new cell phone. She had set it up at my house, and I got the number from the caller ID. No one picked up, and instead it went to an answering machine for Dan. The same Dan who had dated Kelly years earlier, and the same Dan Hannah had been accused of being obsessed with. There was no doubt about who it was. I hung up and I wondered why she had lied to me about who her boyfriend really was. A couple of minutes later, Hannah called me back on her original cell phone. She played it off as a coincidence that I had just called that other number. She said she'd run into hometown Dan and his friends, and since he'd lost his phone, she'd done him a favor by giving him the one she had just purchased. I said how strange it was that she would buy a phone for her boyfriend Dan, only to run into someone else with the same name and give it away instead. Dan's real name is very common, probably one of the most common names for men of my generation, and Hannah joked about how many different people she knew with that same exact name. A couple of months later, she called. She wanted to visit again in the summer. No matter what she said about being in control of the heroin use, it was very obvious that it had become a full-fledged habit. Things had taken a turn in her life. Her boyfriend Dan had moved to Chicago. Hannah said that he was still in love with her and they were still together, but that something had happened with his ex-girlfriend, and they were taking a break and only seeing one another privately. Hannah said he was trying to protect her. According to Hannah, his ex-girlfriend had refused to accept their breakup and had been stalking Dan for months. It was one of the reasons he had moved. Hannah said she had taken an overdose of heroin and had tried to commit suicide when she found out that Hannah and Dan were together. That was the reason that they had decided that they had to keep their relationship secret. That was why Hannah was really in town. Dan was going to be coming later to join her, and they had set up a get-together. I wanted to meet him, but Hannah said he wouldn't act like her boyfriend when other people were around. I started to question her. She got angry and said she wouldn't let me meet him because I wouldn't understand their relationship. We got into a fight. I ordered her out of my house and made it clear that I wanted nothing to do with her. Her mother called me about a year later. She said that Hannah was living with them in Atlanta because something very bad had happened in Minneapolis. Hannah didn't have any friends left. Her mother straight up begged me to please forgive so she could have someone to talk to. She said Hannah had spent 3 months in rehab and was off the heroin, but emotionally not doing well. She said she had to make a trip back to Minneapolis to take care of some things and pick up some of her stuff. Her mother was worried that being back there and around her old friends would trigger her to want to use heroin again. She said it was very important that Hannah didn't relapse. If she did, the consequences would be severe. She wanted me to go with her. I said I would. Hannah wouldn't tell me what happened. She just said that someone had almost died, and it had been an accident, but it had still been her fault. She drove into town to pick me up for our trip up to Minneapolis, but said we had to stop somewhere first. We went to the old bar downtown that we used to hang out in when she had lived in town. She said she had to meet someone. Some young woman walked in, and Hannah walked over to her and hugged her and started crying. She was apologizing all over the place and kept telling her she needed her to realize that it had been an accident. The woman said she forgave her, but that her life had been difficult since what happened and she could not have anything to do with Hannah anymore and could no longer be friends with her. Hannah asked if she had ever spoken to her ex-boyfriend and had a chance to work things out with him. She said no, he was mad at her and he refused to talk to her. Hannah said he had a new cell phone and she gave her the number just in case she changed her mind and wanted to get a hold of him. She left. I was sitting there totally confused by what I had just witnessed. I was really uncomfortable with what I had heard. I asked Hannah if the ex-boyfriend she was talking about was hometown Dan. She said no, someone else that I had never met. Hannah said she and Dan had broken up because he was still using heroin, and she said it was too painful to talk about him. She said it was so painful that when we got to Minneapolis to please not bring him up. She said her friends knew not to mention him around her and she asked me not to also. We got to Minneapolis and the young woman we were staying with turned out to be one of Hannah's former roommates. That is when I found out what had really happened and what Hannah had been refusing to talk about. It turned out that girl from the bar had been the other roommate, the one that had almost died because of something that Hannah did. We settled in and Hannah said that she could explain what happened a year ago. A year ago? That was the first time I realized that this had happened much longer in the past than I thought. The former roommate said that she was happy that Hannah was clean, but she needed her to explain why she had tried to kill the other girl. Those were her words. She wasn't calling it an accident. She said she was there, she saw it, and Hannah had done that to her on purpose, and she wanted to know why. This is what she described. Hannah had a friend from Indiana who had recently broken up with her boyfriend Dan after Hannah told her she'd found out he was cheating on her and had gotten another woman pregnant. Wanting to help her get away from him and start over, Hannah invited her to come live with her up in Minneapolis. What her friend didn't know, though, was that Hannah was using heroin. She didn't like Minneapolis. She'd had a streak of bad luck in the few weeks she'd been there, and even though Hannah kept trying to convince her to stick it out and see if things would get better, she'd already made up her mind. She was going back home. She regretted breaking up with Dan. She wanted to talk to him and see if they could work things out. They had been together for almost 2 years and she was worried because she had lost touch with him. Hannah had managed to track down his phone number for her through some mutual friends, but no matter how many times she called or how much she begged, he refused to answer or return any of her messages. She was upset and told Hannah that she was going to stop by his apartment to see him on her way back to Indiana. She was supposed to be leaving within a day. Hannah kept insisting that she'd like heroin if she just tried a little bit and had been pressuring her hard to join in with everyone else. The roommate was angry about it. She said Hannah knew she was scared and didn't want to try it at all. But Hannah promised her she'd be safe, that it would only be a small dose and that she knew exactly what she was doing. Eventually, she gave in. Hannah bought the heroin. A lot more than normal, she said, because it was for a party later. She prepared the needles and told them she'd used only a small amount. Instead, she had used all that she'd bought, which turned out to be far more than was necessary to kill all of them. Hannah had given the girl the injection, and she slumped over almost immediately, completely still, not breathing. Then Hannah moved on to the other roommate, telling her everything was fine, that the first girl was just relaxing and enjoying herself. She tried to convince her to take her dose, but the roommate hesitated, saying she wanted to check on her friend first. Hannah walked over and began having an imaginary conversation with the unconscious girl, insisting she was fine and just high. But when the roommate went to check for herself, she saw right away that the girl wasn't breathing. She panicked, screaming at Hannah, demanding to know why she was lying. She ran for the phone to call for help. Hannah chased her, grabbing the phone out of her hand and hanging it up mid-dial. When the dispatcher called back, Hannah calmly told them it had been a mistake, that everything was fine. She wouldn't let the roommate near the phone again, insisting she was overreacting. Then, when the roommate tried to get past her, Hannah tried to hold her down and force the needle into her arm. The roommate fought her off and bolted out of the apartment, sprinting down the hall to a neighbor's door. Together, they called 911. When the paramedics arrived, the girl was clinically dead. They worked on her for several minutes before finally getting a heartbeat and rushing her to the nearest hospital in a comatose state. She survived, but for a time it wasn't clear whether she would ever wake up. Hannah told the police she didn't know why she had done it. Later, after consulting a lawyer, she claimed it was the result of heroin-induced psychosis, that she had been temporarily insane at the time. She agreed to a long-term rehab program, along with a year of mandatory drug testing and probation. After she completed the program, the charges were dropped. That's why it had been so critical that Hannah didn't relapse. If she had, she would have been facing real prison time. Hannah claimed it had been a strange temporary hallucination that caused her behavior, that she'd never meant to hurt anyone, and that the whole thing was just an accident, a misunderstanding. It was the same excuse she always used. I'm going to spell this out, since the morons who work for the Minneapolis Police Department were too stupid to realize this 20 years ago. Hannah was obsessed with this girl's boyfriend, Dan. She had been obsessed with him for years. She had developed a detailed and deranged fantasy that the two of them were in a secret relationship because she suffered from a peculiar and rare psychiatric condition called erotomania, or de Clerambault's syndrome. She believed that this young woman was standing in the way of their romance, so she ingratiated herself with her and pretended to be her friend in order to get close enough to find a way to get her out of the way. She successfully managed to spread rumors and interfere in their relationship enough that the two of them broke up. Then Hannah invited this young woman to Minneapolis to isolate her from her other friends and control what information she had access to. This was the year 2000. We didn't have text messages or Facebook back then to stay in touch. Hannah lulled her into a false sense of friendship and security so she could manipulate her and get close enough to hurt her. When she realized the girl was still in love with Dan and wanted to talk to him, Hannah knew that eventually she would discover the truth, that the rumors weren't real, and that Hannah had been the one spreading them. So Hannah purchased a cell phone in Indiana and made a recording of Dan's answering machine message so she could impersonate him over the phone, making the girl believe she was actually in contact with him. She never knew that Dan never received any of her messages. Hannah was using the setup to spy on her. When the girl said she was going back home to see Dan in person, Hannah realized that meant she would discover the truth, that she had given her a fake phone number, and that she had gone to extreme lengths to prevent her from ever speaking to him. It would have been obvious why. She tried to talk her into trying heroin because she planned on killing her and her other roommate, believing it would be a good way to make it appear to be an accident. Hannah was about to have her obsessions with Dan, her delusional beliefs about him and her bizarre mental disorder exposed, and she knew it. She had known for at least a day or more before the incident, which is why it's clear that her actions were premeditated because her motive was. All of this would have been remarkably easy to figure out if the police had contacted Dan or taken a look at Hannah's phone records. Phone harassment had always been her favorite hobby. Instead, they treated it just like the other 999 overdoses they have to respond to every month and gave Hannah the old rehab or prison option. Since her family could afford a lawyer and a 3-month rehab stay, that was the option she took. The police never investigated her for anything, never contacted the man Dan at the center of this, and never took any serious look into her background. It wasn't an accident. It was an attempted murder, and a pretty easy one to prove at that. Instead, the police totally dropped the ball, and because of their incompetence, she was allowed to completely get away with it. At the time, I didn't know any of this. I was trying to act as a support system for a former friend who was suicidal and on the cusp of a heroin relapse. I was suspicious, but anytime I asked Hannah questions, she either said it was too painful to talk about or guilt-tripped me for not respecting her boundaries. She had sworn to me that this young woman had never been in any relationship with the Dan from our hometown that she had known years earlier. I returned to Indiana, and Hannah returned to her parents in Atlanta, and I didn't talk to her for a while. She called later and wanted to visit her old hometown again. Once again, I let her stay with me. We ran into Dan. He had moved to Chicago but happened to be back in town that weekend. I hadn't seen him in years. Hannah had contacted him to arrange a get-together, and she spent the whole afternoon trying to pull him aside to talk. But Dan made it clear he had only come because he wanted to see me. He had broken up with Kelly years earlier, and I assumed he'd been in a long-term relationship since then. Dan said she had left him a year ago and just disappeared. He had called her repeatedly, but she had completely cut him off. He was nice to me, handsome, and a lot of fun to be around, and he asked me out. We made plans to meet up the next day. I saw him at a bar, and he turned around and walked out the door and wouldn't even look at me. I was upset and confused. Hannah was super sympathetic. She apologized for not telling me what he was like and said he had this weird thing with lying to girls and playing with their emotions by pretending to like them. It wasn't like I had never been lied to by a boy before, but this felt strange. A week later, my student loan came through and I decided to go back to college and finish my degree. I moved a couple of hours away. The first person that called me was Hannah. Once again, she wanted to come visit me. She insisted that she had gone out and got me a surprise and she needed to give it to me in person. She said she had something really important to talk to me about, and she said that it would sound weird, but she asked me to promise her that I wouldn't tell anyone she was coming to see me. I humored her. She showed up at my apartment, and when she walked in, the first thing she asked me was if I had told anyone she would be there. At first I said no. She said that she had something for me and reached into her purse. She paused and said that she just wanted to make sure that no one knew she was there. I was frustrated and I kind of offhand said that no one besides my mom and best friend. Hannah got furious. She was angry that I had told anyone she would be there and refused to show me what she had brought as a surprise for me. She went and locked it in her glove compartment because she said she didn't want me to snoop in her stuff and find it. She kept saying she wanted to talk about something, but the time wasn't right. She decided to go home a day early. Then one day, a couple of weeks later, out of the blue, she just showed up on my doorstep one evening. I was on the phone with my best friend, who, by the way, went to the same Catholic high school as Hannah, and while not close friends with her, but knew who she was. I was talking to her when I saw Hannah walk up to my front door. It was an 8-hour drive from Atlanta to Indiana. I got up and opened the door, and I still had the phone up to my ear. When I opened it, Hannah had her head down and she had one hand inside her purse. I said her name and she looked up at me and pulled something purple from her purse. She saw I was on the phone and swiveled around and put whatever she had been holding in her hand back in her bag. She was acting very strange and she was shaking and I was worried. I asked her to come inside. At that point, I was convinced that she was back on heroin, and that had been the secret she had been trying to talk to me about for months. She said that she was upset about a boy and needed to talk to me. She said she had something that she wanted to show me, and she reached into her purse and pulled out a handgun. It was a purple and black revolver, and I realized from the color that it was what she had pulled from her purse when I had first answered the door. She said that she had been checking to make sure the safety was on, and I was lucky that she hadn't accidentally shot me because I had startled her. She said the gun was because she was back on heroin and scared of the part of town she had to go to in order to buy it. I didn't know it back then, but revolvers don't have safeties. She told me about a musician in Atlanta that she had met and how frustrated she was because he had a girlfriend, and she hadn't been able to get him to pay attention to her. She wanted me to tell her what I had done with Dan so she could try the same thing with this guy. She said he was still talking about me months later, and wanted to know why he was still interested, even though we hadn't spoken since the previous summer. From my point of view, he wasn't. He had ghosted me months earlier, but Hannah kept insisting that I must have done something to him. It was like she was implying I had hypnotized him or something equally ridiculous, and she wanted me to tell her how. I clearly explained that I hadn't done anything, and that he had ignored me and never returned my calls after I had tried contacting him. She cried and drank for a couple of hours, then turned around and drove 8 hours back to Atlanta in the middle of the night. Just for the record, Hannah was the one who had given me Dan's phone number. Then I called Hannah to find out what the hell was going on. It was the craziest and most disturbing conversation I have ever had with another person. At first, she just kept saying that I had hurt Dan and I could not ever talk to him again or have any contact with him. None of it made any sense since this was about a guy that had refused to return my phone calls and had ignored me for months. Hannah started getting very upset and kept saying that I knew what I had done, I just wouldn't admit it. She said that Dan hated me and had never wanted anything to do with me, but that I was somehow doing things to him to make him say that and pretend he liked me instead of her. I had no idea what the hell was going on. She said that Dan was her secret boyfriend and that he was in love with her, and had been in love with her for years. She said that the two of them had been together since they were teenagers, and that I knew it but was pretending not to. I asked her how she could have been his girlfriend when I knew of others girls he had dated. She started screeching that those weren't real relationships. He was only pretending to like them. When he talked about them, he was really talking about her, but other people kept doing things to him so that he couldn't tell her directly how he felt. But she knew. She insisted that he found ways to let her know that he was really thinking about her. She said that all of his friends respected their privacy, which was why they would play along when he pretended he was dating other people. She kept insisting that he was in love with her, and no one else. She said she was sick of people pretending to be her friend, and then stabbing her in the back by going after her boyfriend, and that she would not put up with anyone coming between them or hurting him. She said I was forcing him to forget how he really felt, that it had hurt him not to be with her and she wouldn't let me hurt him. I realized that she wasn't making any sense and that she was completely psychotic. I told her to never contact me again and hung up. All I could think about was how she had pulled a gun out of her purse the last time she had shown up at my apartment by surprise. She had given a fatal overdose of heroin to another woman and had been accused by someone else of luring them to a ledge and trying to push her off. The one thing we all had in common was Dan. I called the number I had for Dan. It was disconnected. I thought about that strange situation with the cell phone she had purchased a couple of years earlier. I found that old number in my address book and called it, except this time it wasn't Dan's voice on the answering machine, it was mine. The psycho had made a recording of my voicemail, put it on a cell phone she owned, and once I discovered that, everything fell very clearly into place. That was what had happened to that girl in Minneapolis. And that was why Dan had spent the last several months thinking he was contacting me. There was no relationship with Dan. It was all in Hannah's head, and she had been frantically trying to keep other women away from him to protect her fantasy from imploding. Hannah is psychotic. She has a mental disorder called erotomania, which is the fixed, delusional belief that another person is secretly in love with you. Not everyone with this disorder will be violent, but some are. In certain cases, other people are drawn into strange psychotic dramas and vicious smear campaigns aimed at trying to rearrange reality to fit the delusions in their head. Those perceived as standing in their way can become the victims of extreme violence. Hannah showed up the next day at my apartment, screaming at me to let her in. I refused and was getting ready to call the police when she started crying, saying that Dan had killed himself. Then she walked away, and that was the last time I ever saw her. I spoke to my parents, who told me that I had received several phone calls at their house from people letting me know the same thing. I changed my phone number to keep her from contacting me. I contacted the police in Indiana, who said that if she showed up again, they could arrest her for felony intimidation, but not for anything she had done months earlier. I also contacted the police in Minneapolis, but I knew very little, only Hannah's name, not where or when anything had happened. I asked repeatedly to speak to someone, but the woman on the phone said they weren't interested in talking to me. I moved so she wouldn't know where I lived. I cut myself off from anyone in my hometown who might know her, so nothing could get back to her about where I lived. The last I heard, she was stalking some new guy down in Atlanta. I would have been more than happy to face her in a courtroom, but unfortunately, the law is nothing like you see on TV. So unless I ever have the chance to sit in on her sentencing hearing, Hannah from Indiana, let's not meet again.